So just for additional kind of housekeeping, if you have questions as we're going through the presentation, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We have multiple people that are monitoring the chat, and so we will get to your questions and answer them through the course of the presentation. So just put your questions in the chat, and we'll kind of interrupt Noelle as we go and and ask her the questions. So you can go to the next slide, Noelle. So I wanted to introduce our staff, the staff of Northwest Disability Support. Angela Harvis is here. She's our executive director. You want to say hi, Angela? Is there waving?
I'm glad people are here, and I have a 22-year-old that tells me they're a grown-ass man, and I've been where you were, and I remember just how overwhelming it could feel. So don't expect to get it all figured out today, but just know that there are a lot of people that have information, and we're glad that you're here and learning with us this evening. It's worth it to be a partner. Thank you.
And Marcella Rosen is also here. Want to introduce yourself briefly, Marcella?
Hey everyone, I am the web developer communications support with Northwest Disability, and I'm really excited for this to be our second training in our series. The first one was super informative, even though I am not doing kindergarten transition, but I'm excited to learn more in this one. So feel free to chat me if you're having any technical issues or anything like that.
And I think we'll jump to Joycey, who's our community outreach coordinator. And maybe Joycey, you can introduce yourself and also remind our Spanish speakers of the other presentation. Are you there, Joycey? Okay. There is a presentation going on at the same time in Spanish. So if you are looking for the Spanish presentation, please see the link in the chat. So si usted habla español y desea tomar esta sesión en español, see the link in the chat. Thank you. So next is me. I'm Shelley Johnson. I'm the Kindergarten Inclusion Program Coordinator. I have an 8-year-old who is in 2nd grade and receives services on an IEP. And so I know firsthand the journey that you are on, and I'm happy to be here to support you as you navigate all the complexities. We also have Maria Rangel, who is our bilingual program coordinator. She is not here in this session tonight. We have a session going on simultaneously that's in Spanish, and she is at that presentation. And then we also have Choisy Sarao. And Choisy, are you back? She may have stepped away to handle something else. And then we have Angela Fromm, who is our program director. And she is also not here tonight, but you may get to know her as well as you continue on this journey. So welcome, and we're glad that you are here, and we're happy to be here to provide you support. And you can go to the next slide now, Noelle. So we'd love to hear who you are. And so if you could type in the chat your child's name, grade, school district, something you love about them. It's a great way for you and for us to all connect with the reason why we're all here. And if you're a professional, we'd love to hear your role, your school district, if that applies to your role, and something you love about your work. So nice to get to know all of you a little bit more. All right. So as you continue, as you keep typing in the chat, we'll kind of continue and we can all get to know each other. So could you go to the next slide, Noelle? So Noelle is our presenter, and she comes to us from Portland Public Schools, and she is the mother of 4 amazing children with diverse gifts and needs. And we're so appreciative of the work that you do and of you being here tonight to share your wisdom and your knowledge with all of us. So thank you, Noelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you all.
And yeah, take it away.
Oh, sorry, I muted
There you
myself. Oh, gosh darn it, it's going the wrong way. There we go. I will get Zoom at some point. Sorry, I'm mixed between the world of Google Slides and Google Meets and Zoom. Thank you so much for having me. As you can see here, this is my oldest daughter. She is just turned 18, so she's an adult, and just like Angela said, likes to remind me of that all the time. And just like she experiences with her son, but it does, I mean, I remember very clearly what it was like 12 years ago to transition from early childhood special education into school age special education. I did not work as a school professional at that point in my life, so I was navigating it with just whatever information I could find, and navigating it just like you are now. So it was, and I got this type of information just in time so that I could be a more informed parent at the table when I went to my daughter's first IEP meeting. She is a junior in high school because we did kindergarten twice because it was a rough go the first time. And so she will be a senior next year. But so any questions you have, I'm sure that I've either worked with the situation professionally at this point, which I've worked for Portland Public Schools for, this is my 6th year as a parent engagement and community engagement specialist and special education advocate. And then I worked for about 5 years before that as a special education advocate as well. So if I haven't experienced it with my daughter Olivia, I probably experienced it professionally. So feel free to ask any questions you have. So the why of what we're talking about tonight, which is creating goals that are meaningful for our students with disabilities. and that will get them to the age that, you know, my daughter is now, and getting ready to access a full life and to be a member of her community. You may hear my kids trying to get into the room as we go, so I apologize for that. But I just love this this meme or picture, if you call it. So equality, equity, no barriers. Equality, you know, that's what gave us the Individuals with Disability Education Act, when, you know, people came to the table to say that it was not okay for students with disabilities not to have access to education, which was not that long ago. And what we are aiming for is equity, to make sure that everyone has what they need to be successful. Equality is kind of saying everyone gets the same thing, but as we know, what creates equity is everyone gets what they need to be successful. And what we're aiming for is creating systems that don't have barriers, where we don't have to kind of go back and rethink, oh, this didn't work for a certain population. Let's create systems, schools, and societies with the idea of everyone's going to be in it. How can we make sure the barriers aren't there? So proactively creating that. The not if, but how. Oftentimes, when we're talking about having a child accessing general education, it's about creating equal opportunities, because it's their right to have that rigorous education. Special education is a service, not a place. It's a service to make sure that our children are able to access the education that their typically developing peers or non-disabled peers are accessing. So sometimes it's about finding that right structure, tool, or educator. And students don't necessarily, they shouldn't feel like they have to prove their ability to be included, but that they are supported in that environment and citizens of that community and that classroom. So just a quick recap of the purpose behind creating goals that are meaningful. The purpose of special education is very clearly stated in the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which is the federal law that gives our students with disabilities the right to special education services when they are found eligible for them. And so that is for further education, if they so choose, employment. No one should be leaving our schools feeling like they are not able to access equal and fair wage employment or competitive employment, and independent living if they so choose, so that they feel that they are able to go out into the world and are prepared. And the appropriate in that, in free and appropriate public education, means individualized and effective for your student. And so while we're at the kindergarten stage, sometimes we aren't thinking of this trajectory, but this is the purpose of special education. So when we're talking about goals within your child's individualized education program or IEP, we want to make sure that these goals are aligned with what special education's purpose is and with what the vision for your family is, which is further education, employment, and independent living. So eligibility is found through special education through assessment and evaluation. It opens the door to individualized special education services, supports, and educational setting must be individualized, not prepackaged based on the eligibility category. So what that means is that your child's eligibility, which you probably learned about before this training. If not, I think that last training was also recorded and will be posted to be able to access, but yes, it's perfect. So eligibility does not drive services. So whatever of the category that your child was found eligible for special education services does not come with a certain bucket of supports. They have to be individualized, and they have to be found through data and assessments, if that makes sense. So if your child is eligible under maybe the autism category or the other health impairment category, it doesn't mean they just get that bucket of services. That is just the eligibility that gives them access to whatever services they may need that to be make progress in their education. And once they are found eligible, they are then able to access a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. And that is that is all of the different supports, including the general education and special education services that your child will have access to. And after that is created in the IEP, then we talk about where that is going to take place. And the least restrictive environment for students, when you're talking about that, is usually your neighborhood school. Where would you go if you did not have a disability? So it has to be at the forefront of consideration whenever we're talking about where someone's special education services are going to take place. So the law, the IDEA, this is where this comes from, is very explicit that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are to be educated with children who are not disabled. Special classes, separate schooling, or other removal from the regular education environment occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services, so the different supports, cannot be achieved. That's why I say special education is a service, not a place. So the only reason for a student to go to maybe a more restrictive environment, like a special education placement, is if they're not making progress in that general education environment. And not being at grade level or learning below grade level is not a reason for a student not to be able to access general education, because they have a right to the supports and services that will support them to learn in that environment at their instructional level.
And just to add to that, not making progress, it has to be that they're not making progress with the appropriate supports in place. So if they're just not making progress and they're just in a room with no supports, that doesn't count. We have to add the supports in first, a bunch of supports. We have to try lots of different variety of supports and still see that they're not making progress before we move them to a different environment.
Yeah, it has to be a data-driven decision. Thank you. And how you find out about how your child is doing in special education around their goals is through progress reports. And those progress reports will come out as often as report cards do. So you'll be getting a progress report 4 times a year going forward. And if you don't, then you need to just contact your case manager, which is your child's special education teacher. They're the one who is responsible for making sure that those progress reports are being sent to you, so that it doesn't come to us as it doesn't come as a surprise to you if your child is not making progress. And you can always call an IEP meeting if you have concerns around that at any time. You don't have to wait for the 1-year mark for you to meet with your team again. So you can contact your child's special education teacher or case manager and request an IEP review to go over, do we need to adjust goals? Do we need to adjust supports? I noticed that my child may not be making adequate progress in the area of their goals. So schools throughout the years there are some districts that do inclusive services very well, and there are some districts that have struggled throughout the years. And it is definitely a shift in education reform to make sure that students with disabilities are being educated to the maximum extent able with their general education, typically developing peers. And most data shows that that is the best. I think all data shows, I haven't seen any data that shows otherwise, that is the best way for students with disabilities to make progress. Because when we think about what I said before with the IDEA, the purpose of special education is basically to prepare students for a successful adult life. How is that going to happen if we segregate them throughout the years? How is that going to happen if their typically developing peers don't get to make meaningful relationships with them, or if we're not able to be in our community or our neighborhood school? So inclusion in that sense is about education reform. It's about teaching all students and using best practices. So meaning all means all. So making sure that all students have the supports they need, whether they have disabilities or not. That's where, you know, schools are trying to meet the needs of students that just are coming out of the pandemic, struggling or having trauma, right? Or some students might not have an identified disability, but need an extra scoop of a certain type of instruction. So making sure that school is a inclusive and supportive place for all students. It's about giving access to all and promoting the best outcomes for all, and bringing special education and general education together as collaborators. Because oftentimes in school districts nationally, you'll find that special education and general education kind of work in silos sometimes, or sometimes general education teachers that haven't had to teach special education students as much will feel like, well, that's a special education student, that teacher will help them, when really special education is just supposed to support them in being successful in that general education environment. So the what. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit. So when I talk about goals that are meaningful and that can be met in a general education environment within that inclusive education plan, Oregon has adopted standard-based IEPs. And so that's a standard-based individualized education plan. So in a student's IEP, when they have certain goals within that IEP in the goals section, we want to make sure that those goals are tied to Common Core state standards. Because what are they learning in the general education environment? Common Core state standards, because Oregon also adopted CCSS, right? State standards, sorry, I'm forgetting the acronym. And so in order to make sure that the educational goals of our students with disabilities are relevant and going to prepare them for the next years to come, we want to make sure that they're tied to the high expectations of Common Core state standards. And that's what a standard-based individualized education plan does. It presumes students' competence to learn, describes the students' present levels of performance, which means what is their instructional level. So my daughter is a junior in high school, but she is reading at a second grade level. So we use accommodations, assistive technology, and other things to help her access the content of what other students her age is learning or are learning. And that then ties to the Common Core of what they're doing their junior year. So she's not learning about things that maybe, you know, a young child in preschool would be learning. So we're not tying her goals to child things. We're tying her goals to things that a 18-year-old young woman who's a junior in high school would be learning, like her other peers, but at her instructional level. So set goals as related to students' achievement of grade level standards. And then goals address skills students that they need to access grade level standards. So remember that if your student is learning below grade level, it doesn't mean that they can't participate and learn in that general education curriculum. It just means that we need to support them in accessing it at their instructional level. Are there any questions around that? I can't see the chat, but I know you'll pop in if there are. So these are the 7 steps to writing a standard-based IEP. So I'm not sure if we have any professionals on here this evening. This is a little more in depth than maybe you would need to go, but just know that you can ask and discuss at your child's IEP that you want it to be standards-based and that you want it tied to what they are doing in the kindergarten environment. Yes, Angela.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one thing I find helpful, you can go on to, if you're in Oregon or Washington, you can go onto the state's website, Oregon Department of Education, and look, what is that everyone's supposed to be working towards learning by the end of kindergarten? And that just helps you kind of, I mean, it's kindergarten and there's going to be a lot of things that
Yeah.
aren't that academic happening because it's a whole new world joining that big school community. But it used to help me with Daniel because I would take a look. So what's everybody supposed to learn? And then you're all experts in your kids and you might, you know, like I know Dan loves visuals and he needs to see a couple of people practice something before he can do it. So take a look on the Oregon Department of Education or Washington State website and see what is it that all of us are supposed to be working towards in kindergarten, and that can just sometimes help bring your anxiety down a little too.
Thank you. So here I just want to kind of outline the importance of having a general education teacher at your meeting. You will definitely have, I believe, a general education teacher at your transition to kindergarten meeting, but going forward, they are the ones who are the most knowledgeable in Common Core state standards. The special education teacher will be knowledgeable as well, but that's what the general education teacher does in the classroom all day for a living. So it's important to have them there because they can speak to what will next year look like? What will the kindergarten environment look like? Then when you have that annual IEP talking about creating an IEP for first grade, it's really important to have that gen ed teacher there so that they can talk about what are the things that first graders are learning and how can we make these goals relevant to the content going on in that classroom. And then a special education teacher, they're the ones who are most knowledgeable around creating these goals and around creating the supports that the student through assessment and evaluation and through your input have been identified to need in order to be successful in and make progress in their education. These are the team members of the IEP process, which you may have seen this in the prior presentation, and up here, the very first person, student. My daughter didn't always attend all of her IEPs for all of the time there, but it was just really important to have her voice there, or if you want to bring a picture, especially for going into kindergarten, these professionals most likely haven't met your child yet. So you can bring what I will show, like around the strengths of your student, a picture of your student, to just make sure that it's really student-centered when we're talking about this. Because a lot of times the assessments and evaluations attached to our students with disabilities enter the room before they even do, just as a human. So it's important to humanize and put into context all these evaluations that we are looking at, because sometimes they're deficit-based, right? Because we're trying to identify what are the supports the students needs, what are the students' needs, and how can we best support them? But they are not defined by their disability or their deficits. They are human. And so it's important to bring that to the table when we're going through this. And these are the components of the IEP. So just wanted to give you a quick overview of the different pages and how that drives placement. So the boxes here where it says present levels, transition, which will happen by law, 16 and older. By best practice, usually we start talking about that their freshman year in high school and adding some goals around that. Factors to consider, like, does your student use assistive technology? Do they have behavioral needs that need to be supported? Those things, if they're checked, need to be supported through goals and accommodations and modifications. And then district state assessments, that used to be that they would enter around third grade. Now they enter kindergarten, first grade for most districts, because we do new screenings to rule out specific learning disabilities like dyslexia, things like that. You still have the right to opt out of those, but those are just those kindergarten readiness kind of things are just assessments to help flag if a student is showing needs that we have not yet identified. And then your measurable goals and objectives, that's what we're talking about today, making sure that those goals are relevant and meaningful and individualized to your students. And any goal written, you won't have a goal written about it if it is not already identified as a need in the present levels. So we'll talk about why the present levels of academic and functional development and achievement is so important to identifying meaningful goals for your child. If it is not mentioned in the present levels, then there will not be a goal written about it. And then service summary talks about the related services like speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, assistive technology support, anything that has been identified through evaluation and assessment that your child may need to access and support those goals and make progress. And then all this information drives the placement conversation. So you can't predetermine what placement a student will be in based on their disability. It has to be through the IEP. You actually can't really even talk about placement before you go through the IEP process, because that would be predetermining based on their disability. So those are actually two separate documents that usually reside in one meeting. So when the team is focused on planning for inclusive placements, they should focus on including as much information as possible in the IEP about the necessary supports needed so the child can participate successfully in that general education environment. So here we're gonna, sorry, I'm gonna move my little picture of you guys that's going over my slide. There we go. I'm almost as smart as Zoom now. So here is an example of the information that is collected in that present levels that I was talking about. It starts with the strengths of the student. It is very important that this is a strengths-based document. Then it goes to parent concerns. So I really advise that you write those down. It can be emailed to them in advance. You can write them down on a piece of paper, but I know from experience as a parent, I could definitely come to your meeting and be fully pulled together as a professional. But when I go to my own daughter's IEP meeting, it's emotional. It's, you know, it's a little, it makes me nervous. I'm trying to make sure that she has what she needs to be successful. And sometimes it makes me forget things. So when they turn to you and say, parent, mom or dad, or caretaker, what are your concerns for your child's education? It's hard for me to come up with those things on the spot. So either I'll ramble on and then inevitably leave the meeting and go, shoot, I forgot to mention this. So it helps me to write that down. And when you write down the parent concerns, then they will copy and paste them right into the document. It also timestamps when you brought up that concern. So it's an important part of making sure that we're meeting the needs of the student. Angela, did you have something to add? Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've used that to say, you know, some districts aren't that inclusive, whatever. It's okay to say, we're a family that really values inclusion, and we've heard that it's a challenge in this district. We're really hoping that we're going to work together to create the best experience that's inclusive. So sometimes you can just say something about your family. It's our family's value. We've always been included in our church and our preschool and whatever. And we expect that that will be what we're looking at in this meeting. And in a way, it's not always easy to say that when you're in that meeting. So just setting your stall out and saying, we're coming, this is what we're expecting, and we want to partner with you. It's a place you can have a little go at that, and it's easier sitting at a table and taking your time to do that than when you're in that meeting and feeling a little overwhelmed.
Thank you. And then next is academic performance. So what is the student's instructional level? So that will drive what the goals and the level of goals are to get them to the next step of success and progress. Functional performance around communication, social skills, organization skills, so executive functioning, self-care skills. So when my daughter went into kindergarten, she was still using pull-ups, and she had a toileting plan that just included reminders to go to the restroom. And so those are things. And then she has a communication disorder. So at the time she was using an assistive technology, either visual communication or on a device for communication, to be able to output what she was able to think but couldn't say through communication. So those were things I knew, the tips and tricks to helping her be successful in the different environments that we were in, whether it was preschool or church or the park or a play date. So that's where you as a parent are the expert. And it's really important that you bring that information to the team, especially at this level when they haven't had a chance to spend time with your child. This first IEP, if for those of you who are transitioning into kindergarten from early childhood special education, it's the best guess that the team has to make sure that your child is successful in their kindergarten year, because they haven't had a long time to get to know them. And so your critical information and expertise on your child is so helpful to that team. And then how does the child's disability affect their involvement in general education? So just the different things that they may need support in order to access that. And then, like I said, the transition age information that happens by law, 16 above, usually your freshman year in high school, you start to talk about what those different goals are for your child's adult life. Oh, wrong screen. There we go. So when I talk about the present levels and the strengths of the student, which are right up here at the very top, this is an old person-centered plan of hers. These are the types of things that I will bring to the meeting in order to have attached to her IEP, so that different people know what's important to her, what's important to us as a family, and what is the best way to support her. The ones that we have now are a little more in depth. Most person-centered plans, one-page profiles, sometimes they're called an all about me page, kind of talk about what works for your child, what doesn't work for your child, the strengths, gifts, and capacities of your child, and what are your hopes and dreams for the future. So I have a highly, highly, highly social daughter. And so she loves Starbucks, worked at Starbucks through her whole pregnancy, back before I did this in 2002, I guess that was. So I think she thinks Starbucks is the mothership. I'm not sure, but she has loved Starbucks since the beginning. And I blame it on the fact that I ate it and drank it through her entire pregnancy. But so I would love the full circle moment if she actually became a barista, like I was when I was pregnant with her, until right up before I had her. But some of the important things that, I would want school to know, that maybe because she has a communication delay, wouldn't be able to articulate to the people around her. So it's really important to kind of show pictures of the different things that are important to her, different things that she's participated in, different things that she's proud of, and even different things she's gone through. This middle picture is when she had a full spinal surgery. So, just different things for the team to better understand our children.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, go ahead.
Can I just interrupt
Sorry.
a second, Noelle? I just wanted to reiterate, and Angela mentioned it a little bit, but we also help, and I posted in the chat, one thing that we do is help parents create portfolios of what their family vision is, exactly what Noelle was just talking about. And we have a pretty in-depth kind of information about how to do that. And so if you're interested, that's something we certainly can help you with. And I've posted my email contact info, so you can just let me know you want to do that, and we'll arrange a time to meet and work on those kinds of things.
Can I just share? I received a student that I'd never met before this year, who was a 6th grader or 7th grader. And the mom came, and I won't divulge, but she came with this one pager, and the daughter handed it to us. And it was the best thing that could possibly have happened, because there were so many things that, had you just seen reports and on paper, you might have assumed where the values were, where the interests were, where the strengths, and that one page, and I put it in the chat, some of the things they targeted, but it made her such, it was just a beautiful transition to have that happen. So I highly recommend for everybody to do that, because it's all the fun stuff that we don't know about your kids yet. And that's what builds that camaraderie in the classroom too. So thank you for pushing that. I love that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It really personalizes all of the different formalized assessments we do on students, down to what's, you know, really important, what makes them happy, what makes what's important to them, and where is their vision for their life and their family's vision. So thank you for sharing that. And so then next on the present levels that we were talking about is the concerns of the parent, like I talked about before. And so these are some different ideas that you can put into your parent concerns. Sorry, I have the wrong picture on this. This is more of her person-centered plan and things that she wanted to share. But there are different templates, different things that you can write. It can be handwritten, it can be typed, doesn't matter how techy you are, but having that written parent input and giving it to your child's case manager, which is the child's special education teacher, and then they can put it right into the IEP. Doesn't mean that it's going to all be like happen. It's still a team decision based on what supports and what that looks like, but it means that it has to be addressed, and it timestamps when you brought up the area of concern that you're concerned about, or the things that are important to you as a family. Just like Angela said, going to your neighborhood school. For me, it was really important for Livy to be in her neighborhood school because I was a single mom of 3, and it made it even that much harder on me as a parent if I had children in all different schools, because the program that at the time they wanted to send her to was all the way across town. They would have provided busing, but she had such anxiety that just didn't work at the time. So it was just important for us to have her part of the community and be able to go to school with the kids that she plays with after school on the same street back when we lived out in Hillsborough. So, you know, bringing those types of impactful feelings and visions is important to the team, because those things really matter to students with disabilities. They can already be disenfranchised. Families can already be, you know, going through more than what maybe most families are. I know we were going to the hospital 2 or 3 times a week at that time for different reasons. And it can be very isolating. Sorry, I'm going to admit someone else who is popping up. Can be very isolating. And so it's important that we make sure that our students with disabilities and our families raising those students are part of their community, so that you still have that feeling of an ability to make relationships with those people. Because if we're sending them to a different school, families, and if they're using transportation, families lose that ability to be a meaningful part of that community. Oops, wrong screen. There we go. So again, to drive home the present levels, it's really the foundation upon what the rest of the IEP is written and is developed around. So if it's not mentioned in the present levels, there won't be a support around it in the goals or the service summary. So it's really important to make sure that those things are on that present levels page. This was just an example. I think someone raised their hand. Angela, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to say on the present levels, one tip I have is if there's assessments done, you want to see those assessments. You don't want to be the only one at a meeting that's playing catch up, reading a lot of documents. And you do know your child pretty well. So if there's an assessment done, because my child, from being little, he had a lot of assessments done, and he was allergic to them. So what happened in assessments was often nothing like what I knew. So ask if there are any assessments that you see them. Ask that there's nothing that the rest of the team has seen that you don't get to see at least 24 hours before, so that part of it doesn't waste people's time, but it also gives you a chance to kind of just take that moment and look at it. And like, I remember them saying Dan couldn't do a 2-step process. And I just thought to myself about his motivation around getting a DVD out. That's how old we are. Getting a DVD out, putting it in, turning the TV on, changing the channel to channel 3 so that they could watch that movie. So I could say, well, actually, he can do a 3-step process without instructions when he is motivated by the task. And it was like the opposite of what, because they tested him on something that he couldn't care less about. So just remember that people are not coming at it with bad intent, but they may have bad information sometimes because you're around that kiddo a lot more. So make sure you know what's in the assessments and get your sorry. And nowadays, I know people have sometimes even took little videos to show a child reading a book or, you know, saying a few words. Because if an assessment, the child has said nothing, then that's a way that you're not contradicting, but you're just adding to the wisdom.
Thanks for bringing that up. And like Angela was saying, it'll get easier after your kindergarten year because you'll get to know the team members on the IEP team. So you can always request from the case manager to see the IEP in a draft. So you can go over the goals and be able to meaningfully participate on that day instead of reading them and then having to come up on the spot with your feedback. You can ask for the assessments ahead of time. You can, they don't necessarily have to give them to you, but I know I've not run into any professional who doesn't want to make sure that you have what you need to meaningfully participate in your child's IEP. So if you request those things ahead of time, even just a few days ahead of time or the day before, they are always so receptive and glad to make sure that you have an ability to go over that so that you are a meaningful participant in that meeting. And it also helps them go even quicker. Not that quick is the goal, but it's hard to go through a 3-hour IEP. And so if you have a chance to go over things and kind of collect your thoughts around what is written and put that either into your parent concerns or just write down different questions you wanted to address, it really helps the flow of that meeting. Let's see. So goals should be individual and directed by the student's needs and should also assist in connecting the student to general education curriculum and to their peers. Because what is community? What is an inclusive community? It is that. So our students with disabilities aren't going to have a chance to experience that, and our students without disabilities, more importantly, aren't going to have a chance to experience that if we continue to segregate. So when drafting IEP goals as a team, being sure to consider how the goal can guide the team in working on academic and social skills in a naturally inclusive environment. So making sure that the supports and curriculum are age appropriate. Like I said before, with my 18-year-old daughter who wants to learn about things that other teenagers are learning about, but have an instructional level that is in that elementary age, it's important to make sure she has content that is age appropriate at her instructional level. Lead to meaningful outcomes for your child, support learning in the general education curriculum with peers, and occur in natural settings and times throughout the day. Making sure that the goals are SMART goals. So writing goals that are at the student's level relevant to age and grade level standards, that they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based, so that we can make sure that there is progress being made on the goal. We can make sure we are providing the supports for the student to make progress on the goal. And if that's not happening within that time bracket that the team has decided upon, that we meet again and adjust that goal or adjust the supports to make sure that progress is happening. And then it's not just copy and pasted until the student learns it. So here are some examples of goals that may be not SMART goals or vague goals, and examples of SMART goals. So Owen will improve his reading skills. It's not specific to the student. It's not specific to his instructional level. It's not specific to what next step we want to get that student to, and it's not time limited. A SMART goal example would be, given second grade material, Owen will read passage of text orally at 110 to 130 words per minute with random errors. And then oftentimes that would be followed by a percentile of success. So maybe 7 out of 10 times. So looking for, I like to see 80% accuracy as the benchmark of what we're looking for in a goal. But depending on, we want to make sure the student's able to make progress. So sometimes you'll see maybe a 60 to 70% accuracy in order to make progress on the goal. But I think it's important to keep those expectations high. So it may say 80% accuracy. Another one, Betsy will decrease her anger and violation of school rules. That is, that's not a SMART goal. So provided with anger management, or what we would probably more likely say positive behavioral supports, training and adult support, Betsy will be able to remove herself from environments that cause her to lose control of her behavior so that she has no disciplinary notices. So that is an example of a SMART goal. Kelsey will learn to take turns. So that is a goal that, again, is very vague, doesn't give the setting that it's expected in, doesn't give a individualized expectation, and doesn't give a time limit. So Kelsey will take turns appropriately with peer in a busy gen ed classroom while playing a game for 10 minutes. Would be a more relevant SMART goal to that point. So did you add the Michael Bailey quote in here?
I did not.
Because I had said that I was going to.
I did not
to do that. So Michael Bailey is the one who I originally started doing this training with years ago. And Angela brought up the other day, the best quote he's ever said is, "Do not write goals that a dead person can meet." So such as, Sally will sit in her chair quietly. Dead people can do that too. So we want to make sure, I love Dia and your laughing face right there, because we've all seen them, right? And so it's really important to have high expectations of these goals, that they are relevant, that they are individualized, and that they are leading to the outcomes that special education is supposed to do. Further education, independent living, employment. They need, even at the kindergarten level, want to have those high expectations. An example in my daughter's life is that they wanted her to practice tying shoes, zipping coats, and buttoning buttons. Well, she has cerebral palsy. She has fine motor skills that have really increased, but for the lack of trying, no. And the accommodations have been more meaningful to her. And I didn't, back in the day, we had 2 hours of kindergarten a week because we were in a different district, or a day, excuse me, in a different district. And so I didn't want part of her 2 hours to be taken up leaving the gen ed environment, going down and working on these things that we were already working on at home and that our occupational therapist was already working with her. So I just said, no, thank you. Those aren't relevant to what they're doing in the kindergarten class. And we're working on that at home. We would rather her do things like learn to use scissors or pincer grasp on, writing, different things that they're gluing, all the different things. Kindergarten is an occupational therapist's dream as far as all the fine motor things that they're learning as they go. So that's what I mean by making sure that your voice is heard and relevant in that. Angela, is that hand from before or now? I apologize.
Just now, I love your example, but I'd also say this is a time
Go.
where you can make a suggestion, you know, like my son was nonverbal. So I would, for instance, they always did themes. It's like important to look at what everyone else is doing. So they'd have a theme and it might be spring or whatever in kindergarten. And my suggestion was that there was a basket with things that were relevant to that theme. And then Dan could contribute as people were going around the circle and sharing something. There'd maybe be a nest in it or a little chick or whatever. And whatever Dan took out to share, then the teacher could reinforce, yes, we have chicks that are born in spring or whatever. And if Daniel didn't have that, I know he would have blown out a circle because he was aware enough to know he's expected to share. So your creativity is sometimes really helpful to the teachers, but knowing what everyone else will do is what you were saying, Noel. Don't keep going after something special. And I was always saying, I've got life covered. We have life a go-go at home. We don't want life skills. We want kindergarten skills.
Well, I just wanted to
Thank
do a
you.
quick time check that we are a few
Yes.
minutes past 6. So yeah,
I
we
will
can
go.
maybe.
Go, go, go. And I like what you said.
And we can
Dia,
skip
as
some
well.
things that are less important. So
We transitioned from Northwest Regional ESD into kindergarten, and it was so helpful having the ECSE teacher there. She was a great ally in that meeting. So goals, when we're looking, like I talked about before, oftentimes transition to kindergarten goals aren't highly academic. Kids have been exposed to academics in preschool, but not in a standardized way or through Common Core state standards. So it's important to, this will be more important information as we go throughout the grades, but this is an example of a depth of knowledge chart that shows what a student at 5th grade will be learning and how you can differentiate that based on instructional access all the way back down to kindergarten. So that's the cool thing about Common Core state standards. That's a cool thing about standards-based IEPs is that it's very specific because each skill builds on the next academically. And the teacher has access to this and doesn't have to just guess what a student learning below grade level might need to know. They can actually look through the Common Core state standards in order to make it relevant to what the content of the classroom is, even if they are learning it below grade level. And then your service summary, which is the page that talks about what all of your different services are. We already kind of discussed that. This is just another example of the standard-based IEP and what the different things they are looking at in the service summary and how they come up with those goals, how they come up with the related services if your child has shown eligibility to receive, OT, PT, or speech. What are the different accommodations the student needs to be successful in that general education environment? You want that to be mentioned, and the PLAAFP, that's just an acronym for present levels of academic and functional performance, achievement and functional performance. Sometimes they call them the PLEP, the PLOP, there's lots of different acronyms, but I just call it present levels. But the accommodations and modifications that might be necessary for your student will be mentioned in that present levels and then put into action on that service summary page. So these are the different specially designed instruction models when we're looking at when your child has goals written on their IEP. That means that they need to have specially designed instruction from the special education teacher in order to be able to make progress on those goals. Sometimes that will come from a paraeducator, sometimes that will come from a general educator. It just depends, but it has to be designed by the special education teacher. And the model of accessing that type of support and those minutes of support push in means they're pushing into the general education environment and working on those goals there. Pull out means that the student may be going to the special education classroom in small group instruction possibly, or one-on-one instruction to work on specific goals. Having gen ed sped collaboration is that co-teaching model where the gen ed teacher and the sped teacher work together in teaching that content. That is much more progressive. It is highly effective, but much more progressive than a lot of, I know, our Oregon districts are currently doing, but that is often the goal. And then differentiation is the term that you use when you're talking about meeting a student's needs. Either they might need an extra scoop of instruction to access the general education content going on, or maybe they are above grade level in certain areas and they need to be pushed into, to have more advanced content in order to meet their educational needs. If you are a special education student, it doesn't mean that you aren't also possibly a talented and gifted student. So that is also an assessment that your child can have, because maybe they have really high skills in math, but they struggle with reading. They can receive tag services in that area if they qualify, while still receiving special education services in the area of eligibility and identification of the area of help that they may need. So those are just some terms to be aware of. And then placement, we talked about the least restrictive environment always has to be at the forefront of consideration when you're talking about that. So Angela, I think you are not on mute. There we go. Decisions not to be based on student readiness, but effectiveness of the IEP supports and services. So kind of getting past that idea of they're not quite ready for gen ed. It's more the idea of how are we going to get that environment ready for them? What supports do they need to be successful there? The student does not have to be at grade level, again, to be included in general education settings. With supports, modifications, accommodations, whatever is identified as needed for them to make progress, they have access to those in order to be successful with their general education peers. And then the different tools that you will sometimes see on the service summary. This is more educational approaches. You'll hear about universal design for learning or universal design. That goes past the idea of buildings and building things that are physically accessible, but also building curriculum that is educationally accessible to all learners, and making sure that it has a variety of opportunities for representation. So how does the child best receive the curriculum? Is it through a computer? Is it through a worksheet? Is it through a different type of modality? That they have multiple abilities to express what they know. Is that through picture exchange communication system? Is that through augmentative communication? Or is that through sign language? Or is that through writing instead of talking? Whatever best meets the needs of the student to be able to express. So different means of expression is really important. And so that's a really important thing to know about when you're looking at making sure all students can access the curriculum. And then co-teaching we talked about as well. So for people with disabilities, technology makes things easier, or without disabilities, technology makes things easier. For people with disabilities, technology makes things possible. So my daughter was not able to express herself without an augmentative communication device or without sign language, but not many people knew sign in that environment, right? So unless you're exposed to it, why would you really know it? So it was really important for her to be able to do that. And even now it makes, she can't necessarily write everything she knows, but she can type way more than she can write. So it makes it possible for her to be able to express what she knows through technology. So assistive technology is on a page in the IEP. The first time you're going to see it outside of the present levels, if you bring up that your child utilizes it, is on factors to consider. Does the child utilize assistive technology? And the important thing to remember that assistive technology, some people think assistive technology and just see iPads. It's low tech, mid tech, high tech. So it can be a visual schedule, a communication page with pictures that you point to make choices. Mid tech could be like, you know, a voice output, but it's not an iPad. Or it could be a switch, like where they used in order to ask a question or to participate. High tech could be like what we talked about, a Chromebook, an iPad, or an augmentative communication device. And how you identify what works best for a student, you can ask the school for a set meeting. And that looks at what the student needs, what the environment the student is in, what tasks are we asking the student to do, and what specific tools do they need to do that. So in our advocacy for our students with disabilities, I know both as a parent, sorry, my dog is trying to get involved. He's also my timekeeper, apparently. He's like, you're going too long. Did you see that nose? It's important to remember that the people at the table, while they may work with students with disabilities, not everyone has had a close relationship with someone with a disability. And it's important to remember that not everyone has had to go down that journey. Unless you are raising someone with a disability or a sibling to have a parent who has experienced it yourself, you don't have the same lived experience because society still really silos the experience of typically and non-typically developing people, even when we look at employment now, right? We have areas of advocacy to do everywhere. But I really love this quote because it helps to remind me to be patient with those who have not had the chance to understand this in the way that we have. So for the sake of our children, we must strive to be patient with those whose experiences have not given them access to our perspective. It is our duty to lead these people to a fuller understanding of the beauty and ability within our children. To do this, we must become effective advocates. So I just love that quote to remind myself. And here are just some tips, to remember as you're going through your first IEP and every IEP following. Bringing a note taker is helpful. It's really hard for me to talk and take notes at the same time. And so it's helpful if I just have a friend who's writing it down so that I can remember things later and who has a second take on the notes being taken. And make sure that someone at your IEP is taking notes who works for the school district. That's another thing important to remember. That almost always happens, but sometimes, you know, people just may forget. Understanding the IEP process. Sorry, go ahead, Telly.
Oh, do you know, Noelle, does Portland Public Schools allow recording of IEP meetings?
You
an
have
accommodation
to have
for
the
parents?
okay from the other person
Mhm.
being recorded, which is, I think, an individual law of decision, not just a district, you know, policy. And then if the team decides, sure, you can record, but then we have to record as well if you're working for Portland Public Schools.
Okay.
And I feel like most districts do the same thing, is that if it has to be comfortable to everyone there. And if it is, if they do decide to record, the district also does the recording as well.
I'd say it tends to create a weird atmosphere. I mean, it makes no sense because sometimes it's just that, like, I mean, we've all got smartphones, and if your partner can't be there, the reason might be good, but you know, you're trying to market your child in this meeting and you're trying to build a relationship. So it's finding the balance in there is always, you know,
unless it's an accommodation, it is kind of a relationship killer. But making sure that good, effective notes are taken. The team can always just send you the notes right away when it's done. And if that does come up that for some reason a recording is requested, from my experience in any district in Oregon, it's just that the district also records at the same time if the people at the table are comfortable with that. Understanding the IEP process and your role on the team, that you're an equal member of the team. Knowing the chain of command is important. If you are disagreeing with your child's IEP team, knowing that there's a district rep you can talk to, the principal you can talk to, or the special education director. The IEP ahead of time or assessments really helps. Communicating positively and regularly with your case manager is important, because that person is charged with making sure that your child's IEP is being implemented in their school environment. So it's really important to have an open communication with them. You're keeping records of things. Now it's easier with everything being digital. Before, I remember having just binders and binders of all the different things, trying to remember what I had and referencing it and blah, blah, blah. Having that positive attitude and a solution-oriented team member. I remember having lots of disagreements with my daughter's case manager when she was younger, but I never doubted that she didn't have the best intentions and think that what she was talking to or wanting to do was in the best interest of my daughter. We just had differences of opinion on what that looked like, and being able to resolve that and negotiate that. And then bringing your written parent input, just really helpful for you, really helpful for the team, and that person-centered plan or one-page profile or portfolio or all about me page, whatever that looks like. There's tons of templates everywhere. I think at one point I made a brochure one because it was such a cute template. So I had a brochure on my daughter. She loved handing that out to the team. She would basically come in, hand that out, and then be like, bye, see ya, y'all are boring. So it's a really powerful tool for them with self-determination and self-advocacy as well, because they're sharing what's most important to them. So I think that is all I have. I apologize. I was a little bit longer winded than I anticipated. But I can hand it over to questions, or if Angela and Shelley want to add things.
Are there any questions from anyone? We have just a few minutes, and then we have a couple of closing resources to give you.
Go to bed. It's so exciting. I know I have a
questions right now.
5-year-old going to kindergarten next year who does not have an IEP, but having a pandemic baby where they kind of experienced she didn't get to access preschool during the pandemic. So I feel bad, number one, for the kindergarten teacher that I'm going to be handing her off to in the fall with limited preschool experience. But I know for all of our students, that really impacted what kindergarten may look like and feel like. But just remember, it's exciting.
Yeah, that's a good reminder, is like to enjoy the journey too, and like all the excitement of moving to a new place and graduating from preschool and all of that. Don't forget to celebrate those parts of it too. And if any of you have questions,
I
think Dia was going to say something.
Just on that, it's so exciting coming into kindergarten, and we do the transition with our early childhood program, and we think so much about the IEP in the class, but also just your parents of kids in our school, and encourage you to be involved in other things that don't necessarily relate to special education. All the fun things that go on in school, those are all part of being in school, and we really value your input and also just being part of the school family. So speaking for Bobcats, please.
Thank you so much, Dia.
So if you do think of questions after the fact, please feel free to reach out, and we can answer those questions or get you answers if we don't know the answers. I'll post my email again in the chat, but if you want to move to the next slide, Noelle, I think there's a few more.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so here's some resources. And the first one is just a reminder that we at Northwest Disability Support do offer drop-in support related to kindergarten inclusion, IEP questions, creating your child's portfolio. So please do contact us for that kind of thing. And then Noelle has some other resources there you listed. And when we send out these slides, those you will be able to access the links that are
Yeah, they're
connected
linked.
in those resources.
And we have quite a lot of resources on our website.
Yeah.
But normally you're here dropping in on a one training. We normally have a cohort, you know, when it wasn't COVID, you'd even get a glass of wine and a dinner while we were talking about this stuff. We don't expect it to all go in one go, but we haven't gone away after this. So anyone that's feeling a little overwhelmed, come back to us, take a look at what's on our website, digest parts of it, and then come back with your questions, because it's a bit overwhelming in a group this size. And we sound like we know it all, but we've been where you were. And I will say, anybody that's on this call, you're already way ahead, because you know that you want to partner, you know that you want information, and you've all shared something you care about your child. And there's a kind of privilege in that, but there's also a recognition that you're going to join another community and bring your best self and work for your child. So I just congratulate everyone making time after a busy day and dinner. You know, I've already had my husband in saying, we've run out of butter, how do I... So thanks for being here. We're really grateful that, because we're parents and we know it's a challenge. And Dia, I'm grateful you are here as a professional. So know that we don't disappear after this. And Shelley does a wonderful job of supporting folks. And we're going to send some resources, send the slides, and don't be strangers, even if it's that you're sending us a couple of questions in an email.
Thank you so much.
Okay, would you jump to the next slide, Noelle?
Oh, yeah.
So this training series is also continuing. So we had a training last month on kind of the legal aspects of an IEP, and that recording is available on our website. And we will be having a training next month in March about portfolios. So kind of we've been talking about that throughout this meeting. And in April, we have a training on visual supports and communication. And then in May, we're going to have a training TBD on inclusive positive behavior supports. So go ahead and mark your calendars with those dates and times so that you're ready for them when they come. We'll be sending out reminders of all of that. If you can go to the next slide, Noelle. And then I just wanted to, so when you leave this session, you should get a survey. I don't know. I think Marcella, if you're still on, maybe you can have the survey go, because it's not letting me access it right now. But when you leave the session, there should be a survey that pops up, and we would be really grateful if you would, it's just 5 questions, it's very short, if you would answer that, and so that helps us improve our future offerings. Angela?
And Sandy had asked, could you just repeat those dates?
Oh, yeah, can you go back? So February 24th is tonight. March 10th is the next one on portfolios, and then April 14th, and then May. And the March 10th one is also, I believe, from 5 o'clock to 6:30. Not sure why that time dropped off. So the next is March 10th, and then April 14th, and then TBD in May. All right. And I am posting my email again in the chat. Oh, that's not my full email.
And can I ask something that it's a tradition when we're in person, and I'm usually the one with my bad handwriting, writing it on a sheet. If people could put just give me one word in the chat box, kind of summing up the session and the way it landed with you tonight, I'd be grateful. I'll start.
You and I had the same one, Angela. Insightful, organized, support, helpful, informative, community. Great.
When I did this years ago, my word was bewildered. It's okay if you're bewildered too. We'd like to help.
All right. Thank you all for attending, and we hope to connect with you again either next month's presentation, or reach out to us at any time, and we will support you.
And thank you, Noelle, for sharing your evening.
Yeah, and thank you,
all your
Noelle.
skills.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Dia.
Bye. Bye, everyone.